The chamber of luminous accord was a symphony of solid light. Crystalline spires, grown, not built, soared into a vaulted darkness where captured nebulae swirled in silent, majestic apathy. The air itself hummed with a low, resonant frequency, the collective psychic exhalation of the glyptal consensus. Here, thought was given form, and fear was a tangible pressure. Kalen Vor, emissary of the outer cadence, felt that pressure as a physical weight upon his multifaceted carapace. He stood on the designated dais, his position granting him a view of the entire assembly. The light from the chamber's core refracted through the polished obsidian floor, casting long, distorted shadows of the gathered figures, praetors, resonators, and wardens, the pillars of an empire that had measured its existence in geologic time. Silence reigned, a profound and heavy thing, broken only by the shimmering, bell-like tones of the prime resonator as it concluded the data recitation. The final image hung suspended in the chamber's center, a three-dimensional schematic, crude and offensively asymmetrical. It was a vessel of the newcomers, the ephemeral species that called themselves human. The glyptal had been observing them for a standard cycle, their expansion a chaotic, yet strangely contained, burst of activity on the galactic fringe. They were deemed primitive, their technology a discordant blend of elegant theory and brutal application. This vessel was proof. It was bulky, scarred with micrometeoroid impacts it had not bothered to elegantly repel, and its energy signature was a roar of inefficient fusion, a barbarian's shout in the cosmic dark. They had designated the ship CIPHER-8, a name derived from the fragmented, almost nonsensical snippet of its final transmission. The evidence is incontrovertible, a harsh, grating voice cut through the reverent silence. It was Xylos, warden of the adamant shield, his crystalline form a jagged masterpiece of military austerity. His thoughts, projected for all to perceive, were sharp and aggressive. The human vessel, CIPHER-8, penetrated the Veil Nebula, a strategic buffer zone. It approached the orbit of Xylos Prime's moon, a world we have designated for stellar energy harvesting. It then ceased to exist. An implosion of its primitive power core. A pathetic end to an act of blatant espionage, or, more likely, a prelude to a poorly conceived invasion. Xylos gestured with a sharply angled limb, and the schematic of the human ship pulsed with a threatening red light. They are testing us. They send their most disposable asset, a ship they called outdated by their own admission in intercepted fleet communications, to probe our defenses. Its destruction is their message. They are willing to sacrifice their own to learn our strength. We must reply in a language they will understand. A demonstration of overwhelming force. We must excise their nascent colony on the Orion Spur before it becomes a festering wound. Kalen Vor felt a wave of dissent ripple through the consensus. Xylos' logic was linear, brutal, and deeply appealing to the more ancient, predatory instincts of their kind. But it felt incomplete. He had spent more time than any other studying the humans, poring over their scattered transmissions, their art, their philosophies. They were a whirlwind of contradictions. They waged war on themselves with a ferocity that stunned the glyptal, yet they composed music that could make the core of the chamber resonate with sorrowful beauty. They built disposable tools, and yet spoke of eternity. Warden Xylos presents a conclusion as if it were an axiom, Kalen Vor projected, his own thoughts smooth and measured, a calming counter-frequency to the Warden's jagged broadcast. The central nebula display shifted its focus to him. But he has mistaken a single data point for an entire narrative. We do not know the vessel's intent. To assume espionage or military probing is to project our own strategic doctrines onto a species that has demonstrated, above all else, a profound unpredictability. Unpredictability is a synonym for chaos, emissary, Xylos retorted, his thought projection laced with contempt. And chaos is a disease that must be purged from the galactic body. Or it is a sign of a complexity we have not yet fathomed, Kalen Vor countered, holding his ground. He focused the assembly's attention on a different part of the data. Consider the ship itself. Our analysts confirm the Warden's assessment. It is, by our standards, archaic. Its armor is a simple composite alloy, not a dynamic energy field. Its propulsion is rudimentary, but look closer at the energy readings just before its dissolution. They were not indicative of a cascade failure. The output was rhythmic, deliberate. The energy did not spike. It was rerouted, channeled into the ship's central cavity with incredible precision. A murmur of confused resonance filled the chamber. The data stream shifted, magnifying the energy logs. Kalen Vor was right. It wasn't the signature of an explosion. It was more like a controlled, focused release, an exhalation of immense power that simply consumed the vessel that contained it. And what of the final transmission? Kalenvor continued, pressing his advantage. We intercepted a fragment heavily distorted. Our linguistic engines translated it with low confidence. The warden dismisses it as nonsense, but the words were, CIPHER-8 lost in air. What does that mean? It is not a standard distress call. It is not a declaration of war. It is poetic, almost philosophical. It suggests a transformation, not a destruction. Poetry has no place in strategic analysis, Xylos boomed. The ship is gone, its crew vaporized. That is the only reality that matters. They crossed a line, they paid the price. Now we must ensure they never get the chance to do so again. The warden's conviction was a powerful force, and Kalenvor could feel the consensus swaying back toward him. The Glyptal were a species of immense patience, but that patience was born of a deep-seated fear of the unknown. For eons, they had maintained the galactic peace through overwhelming technological and strategic superiority. The humans, with their chaotic expansion and illogical behavior, represented the first true variable in millennia. The Prime Resonator, a being of immense age whose crystalline form had grown so complex it resembled a living mountain of diamond and shadow, finally stirred. Its voice was not a projection of thought, but an actual vibration in the chamber's structure, a sound that felt as ancient as the stars themselves. The emissary raises a valid query. Haste is the enemy of permanence. The warden counsels action based on fear. The emissary counsels patience based on uncertainty. Both are valid states of being. But neither is a foundation for a decision that will echo for a million cycles. The resonator turned its immense, slow focus toward Kalenvor. You have studied them, emissary. Beyond their technology, beyond their military capacity, what is your assessment of their essence? What drives this species? The question hung in the air, a challenge far greater than Xylos' military posturing. Kalenvor took a moment, gathering his thoughts, letting the resonant silence of the chamber settle. He had to convey the impossible paradox of humanity. Prime Resonator, they are a species defined by a fundamental duality. They possess a capacity for destruction that rivals the most violent stellar phenomena. Their history is a litany of self-inflicted wounds. Yet they simultaneously possess a capacity for creation, for empathy, for self-sacrifice that is illogical. They will fight over a barren rock, yet they will weep for a fallen enemy. They build weapons that can shatter worlds, and then they use that same understanding of physics to compose symphonies about the birth of those same worlds. They are fiercely individualistic, yet their greatest achievements are collective. They are, in essence, a constant, ongoing war between their worst impulses and their highest aspirations. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. To strike them now based on this single, ambiguous event is to risk igniting the very fire we fear. We would be validating their paranoia, their aggression, their belief that the universe is a hostile place. We might win the initial conflict. Our superiority is not in question. But we would create an enemy that learns, adapts, and endures. An enemy that would wage a war not of logic or strategy, but of pure, unyielding survival. Such a war would have no end. It would simply burn until one of us is ashes. So we do nothing? Xylos' thought was a blade of ice. We let them trespass and probe, and we simply watch. That is not patience, that is weakness. No, Kalenvor replied, his own conviction hardening. We do not do nothing. We do what we have always done when faced with a new intelligence. We seek to understand. We open a channel, we ask. Before Xylos could offer another violent rebuttal, a new tone chimed through the chamber, a soft, urgent pulse from the outer system sensors. The central display flickered, the schematic of the outdated human ship vanishing, replaced by a live feed from the edge of the Glyptal sensor net. A single vessel was approaching. It moved with a silent, effortless grace that was the antithesis of CIPHER-8. It was long and slender, a blade of polished obsidian and soft, internal light, its energy signature so clean, so controlled, it was almost undetectable. It was not a warship. It bore no visible weapons. It moved not with the brutal thrust of fusion engines, but by gently, precisely bending the fabric of spacetime around it. It was a work of art, a statement of technological mastery that silenced even Xylos. A message request followed, transmitted on a broad, open frequency. It was not coded, it was not encrypted, it was an invitation. The Prime Resonator's ancient voice echoed. They are here. It seems, emissary, that your wish has been granted. We shall ask. The human vessel, which identified itself as the diplomatic courier vigil, was guided to the orbital cradle reserved for foreign emissaries. The cradle itself was a marvel, a ring of spun crystal and quiescent energy fields that dwarfed the human ship. Yet the Vigil docked with a quiet confidence that seemed to diminish the station's grandeur. There was no military escort, no fleet behind it. It came alone, an act of either supreme arrogance or absolute faith. Kalen Vore was selected to lead the diplomatic contingent. Xylos was present as well, his presence a non-negotiable demand from the military factions, a silent, glittering threat beside the emissary's calm demeanor. They stood in the grand reception hall, a cavernous space designed to awe visitors with the scale and permanence of the glyptal consensus. The walls were lined with strata of history, glowing veins of memory crystal that chronicled the rise and fall of galactic empires long forgotten. The airlock hissed open, not with a jarring clang of machinery, but with a soft sigh of equalizing pressure. A single figure emerged. It was a human female, clad in a simple dark blue garment that seemed to absorb the light of the hall. She was small, fragile by glyptal standards, her bipedal form an evolutionary inelegance. Her face was pale, her features symmetrical, and her eyes, Kalen Vore found himself momentarily captivated by her eyes. They were a deep, dark brown, and they held a stillness, a depth of patience that he had not expected. They did not scan the hall with awe or fear, but with a quiet, analytical calm. She seemed not a visitor, but an observer who had seen 1,000 such halls before. "I am Ambassador Eva Rostova," she said, her voice soft but carrying perfectly in the hall's acoustics. The universal translator rendered her words with flawless precision. "I thank the glyptal consensus for granting this audience. I come on behalf of the Terran Alliance to address the recent event concerning our vessel, the TAV Stargazer." Xylos bristled, his thought projection a low growl. "Your vessel was designated CIPHER-8. It violated our sovereign space. It was destroyed." Ambassador Rostova turned her gaze to Xylos. There was no fear in her expression, only a mild, almost clinical curiosity. "Your designation is noted. Its operational name was Stargazer. It did enter the Veil Nebula as intended, and it was not destroyed. It was fulfilled." The statement was so profoundly strange that it created a ripple of confusion throughout the glyptal contingent. Fulfilled? Kalen Vore stepped forward, his own thoughts a careful mesh of diplomacy and inquiry. "Ambassador, your choice of words is unusual. Our sensors recorded a catastrophic energy release from your vessel's core. By all metrics, it ceased to exist." "That is correct," Rostova said with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "The vessel did cease to exist. Its purpose was to deliver its cargo and then expend its structure to initiate the final phase of its mission. The ship was the delivery system. Its destruction was the final, successful step of its deployment." A heavy silence descended upon the hall. Xylos's jagged form seemed to vibrate with suppressed rage and disbelief. "Deployment? You deployed a weapon? You transformed a vessel into a bomb in our territory." "No, Warden," the ambassador replied, her voice remaining perfectly level, a placid sea against his storm of accusation. "Not a weapon, a garden." Kalen Vore felt a profound disconnect between the word and the reality of the data. A garden, in the frozen, methane-choked atmosphere of a lifeless moon orbiting a gas giant. He gestured for the central display to activate, bringing up the image of the moon in question, a barren, gray sphere shrouded in a toxic, roiling atmosphere. "Ambassador, this is the world your vessel approached. It is inhospitable. There is no liquid water, no breathable atmosphere, no foundation for what your language defines as a garden." "Not as it is, no," Rostova agreed. "As it will be. The Stargazer was what we call a Genesis-class vessel. You called it outdated. We called it patient. The thick, heavy plating you saw as primitive armor was, in fact, layered shielding. It was designed to protect its cargo not from attack, but from the long decay of time and the harsh radiation of deep space. Its inefficient fusion core was intentionally designed to produce specific thermal and electromagnetic radiation, a nursery for what it carried within." She took a slow step forward, her gaze sweeping over the assembled glyptal. "The Stargazer carried a payload of extremophilic microorganisms, genetically engineered over centuries. They are designed to thrive in the precise atmospheric conditions of that moon. The vessel's final act, the catastrophic energy release you observed, was the carefully calibrated shattering of its core. This was not an explosion. It was an aerosolization event. The energy flash vaporized the ship's internal reservoirs of frozen water, methane, and ammonia, creating a temporary, superheated atmospheric bubble. Into this bubble, the ship's structure, which was composed of refined carbon, iron, and silicate composites, was dispersed as a fine dust. The microorganisms were seeded into this nutrient-rich cloud. The ship itself became the soil. Kalenvor stared at the human, his mind struggling to process the scale and audacity of her words. They had not sent a warship. They had not sent a scout. They had sent a world seeder. They had taken a ship they themselves considered old, a relic, and transformed it into the first breath of life for a dead world. The sheer, breathtaking long-term thinking was unlike anything he had ever encountered. "And the final transmission?" Kalenvor asked, his voice now a hum of pure intellectual curiosity. "CIPHER-8 lost in air. What did it mean?" "It was a mission status report in our poetic shorthand," Ambassador Rostova explained. "The operational designation for that seeding project was CIPHER-8. The plan was for the ship to be wholly integrated into the moon's atmosphere. It was, quite literally, lost in air. The mission was a success." Xylos was, for the first time, utterly silent. His rigid certainty had been shattered by a truth so far outside his comprehension that he had no framework to respond. A weapon he understood, a threat he could counter, but a species that would expend a massive vessel simply to plant microbes on a worthless rock, with no expectation of seeing the results for thousands, perhaps millions of years, that was not strategy. That was something else entirely. "Why?" Kalenvor asked, the single word echoing the question that now pulsed through the mind of every glyptal in the hall. "Why would you do this? That moon holds no strategic value. It has no resources you cannot find elsewhere in greater abundance. It will not be habitable for your species for eons, if ever. What is the purpose of such an immense, long-term expenditure?" Ambassador Rostova's calm expression softened, just for a moment, into something that looked like a quiet, profound sadness. It was an emotion so deep and ancient it seemed to resonate with the memory crystals in the walls around them. "We do it because we can," she said softly. "We do it because where there is barrenness, we believe there should be life. We are a young species, it is true. We are chaotic and we are often violent. But one of our oldest philosophical tenets is the idea of being a good ancestor. We plant trees whose shade we will never know. We build foundations for cathedrals that will not be completed for 1,000 years. And we seed worlds with the potential for life, not for ourselves, but for life's own sake. It is a repentance of a kind, for the life we have extinguished in our own past, on our own world." She looked directly at Kalenvor, and in her eyes he saw the dizzying depth of human history. The wars, the plagues, the triumphs, the art, the boundless cruelty, and the equally boundless compassion. He saw a species that had looked into the abyss of its own nature, and instead of recoiling, had decided to create. The stargazer was not an act of aggression, she concluded. It was an act of hope. The revelation settled over the glyptal consensus not like a single piece of information, but like a paradigm shift. The political and military calculus that had governed their interactions with the humans was rendered obsolete. How could you threaten a species whose measure of success was planting a seed that would sprout in 1,000,000 years? How could you intimidate a people who saw the complete dissolution of a massive starship not as a loss, but as a successful planting? The human capacity for long-term thinking was not just strategic. It was existential, almost spiritual. In the days that followed, Kalenvor and Ambassador Rostova engaged in deep, lengthy discussions. They met not in the intimidating grandeur of the reception hall, but in a quiet contemplation chamber, a sphere of polished jet where the only illumination came from a single, slowly pulsing star core. Here, they spoke of philosophy, of art, of the differing natures of their species. Kalenvor learned that humanity was not a monolith. The Terran alliance that Rostova represented was just one faction, a coalition dedicated to science, diplomacy, and this great work of seeding life. There were other human factions, more militaristic, more isolationist, but the alliance was in ascendance. The stargazer was not an anomaly. It was the primary expression of their cultural purpose. He learned that humans did not fear silence or emptiness as the glyptal did. The glyptal, a communal, psychically linked species, found true solitude terrifying. Humans embraced it. They sent lone explorers into the void. They built monasteries in desolate wastes. They found meaning in the quiet, empty spaces. Their expansion was not a conquest of territory, but a conquest of loneliness. During one of their conversations, Kalenvor finally voiced the question that had been troubling him since the ambassador's arrival. "The vessel you came in, the Vigil, its technology is orders of magnitude more advanced than the Stargazer. The drive system alone is something our physicists believe to be purely theoretical. Why? Why would you use such primitive technology for a task so profound when you are clearly capable of so much more? Ambassador Rostova looked into the pulsing starcore for a long moment before answering. For two reasons, emissary. The first is practical. Genesis-class vessels are designed to be self-sufficient, simple, and rugged. They are built from common materials because the ship itself is the final payload. It's a matter of resource allocation. It would be inefficient to dissolve a ship like the Vigil into an atmosphere. Its purpose is different. Its purpose is to connect, not to seed. She paused, and her gaze grew distant, heavier. The second reason is one of politeness, of principle. When we enter a new region of space, we do not lead with our most advanced technology. We do not arrive with overwhelming power. The Stargazer was designed to look non-threatening. It was designed to be underestimated. It broadcast its presence with an inefficient engine. It was a deliberate statement: we are here, but we are not a threat. We are builders, not conquerors. We believe that first contact should be an invitation, not an intimidation. Kalen Vore felt a chill run through his crystalline structure, a sensation akin to awe. This was a level of diplomatic and philosophical foresight that was staggering. The Glyptal's first principle was to display strength to deter aggression. The humans' was to display modesty to invite curiosity. They had deliberately sent their outdated ship as a gesture of peace, a gesture the Glyptal, in their ancient pride, had completely misinterpreted as a prelude to war. They had been prepared to annihilate a people for extending a hand in greeting. The shame of it was a sharp, cutting frequency in his mind. Xylos, humbled and silent, had retreated from the forefront of the discussions. The military faction was in disarray, its leaders unable to formulate a response to a species that defeated threats by refusing to be won. The consensus was slowly, painstakingly, building a new understanding of humanity. They were not chaotic primitives. They were a species of profound, almost frightening, depth. They were gardeners in a universe the Glyptal had only ever seen as a fortress to be defended. An alliance was proposed, not a military one, but a scientific and cultural one. The Glyptal would share their knowledge of stellar mechanics, of temporal physics, of the deep structures of the universe. In return, the humans would share their sciences of life, their mastery of genetics, their understanding of consciousness, their art, their music. It was to be a true symbiosis. On the final day of the initial negotiations, as the Treaty of Understanding was being finalized, Kalen Vore met with Ambassador Rostova one last time in the contemplation chamber. A sense of peace and mutual respect had settled between them. The crisis was averted. A new era of cooperation was dawning. "There is one last thing that puzzles me," Kalen Vore projected softly. "The operational name for the seeding project, CIPHER-8. It seems an odd designation for a project of such life-affirming scope. A cipher is a code, a mystery. Why that name?" Ambassador Rostova's face, usually a mask of serene composure, became shadowed with a gravity that Kalen Vore had not seen before. The quiet sadness he had glimpsed in the reception hall returned, deeper and more profound. Because the Stargazer had a secondary, passive mission, emissary. The primary goal was to seed life. The secondary goal was to listen. She gestured, and a small device in her hand projected a holographic display between them. It was not a schematic or a map. It was a waveform, a complex, jagged line of energy data. "Our astronomical sensors are very sensitive. For decades, we have been cataloging signals from across the galaxy. We found a pattern, or rather the lack of one." Kalen Vore studied the waveform. It looked like background radiation, the normal hiss of the cosmos. "I do not understand." "This is the combined energy signature of 1,000 star systems, all of which should, by statistical probability, host advanced technological civilizations," Rostova explained, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "There should be radio waves, energy transmissions, drive signatures, but there is nothing, just this, silence. We have found ruins, emissary, on countless worlds, traces of civilizations that reached a certain point, interstellar travel, advanced energy production, and then they simply stopped. No signs of war, no evidence of natural disaster. They are just gone, wiped clean. The silence is not an absence of sound. It is an artifact. It is the echo of a scream that has faded." Kalen Vore felt the chamber grow cold. The pulsing starcore seemed to dim. The ancient fear of the unknown, the fear that had driven the Glyptal for eons, returned with a chilling, primal force. "We call it the Great Silence," Rostova continued. "We believe something is out there, a force, a phenomenon, a filter, something that culls advanced civilizations. We do not know what it is. We do not know how it works. All we have are these faint, residual energy traces it leaves behind." a unique quantum signature in the vacuum where a civilization used to be. She manipulated the display, isolating a tiny, almost invisible flicker within the waveform. The stargazer's sensitive sensor arrays were designed to listen for that specific signature. As it was performing its final dispersal, its systems captured this. A fresh echo, from a system just beyond the Veil Nebula. Another civilization had just gone silent. She looked at him, her human eyes filled with a terrible, ancient burden. The project was called CIPHER because our work of seeding life is our coded answer to this great mystery, this great threat. We are not just planting gardens, emissary. We are building reservoirs of life. We are hiding seeds in every corner of the galaxy in the hope that some of them will survive whatever is coming for us. Our work is not born of hope alone. It is born of a deep and profound fear. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. CIPHER-8 lost in air, Kalen Vor breathed, the words resonating with a new, dreadful meaning. It was not just about your ship. It was about them, the other civilization. They were lost in the air of their own world. Yes, Rostova confirmed, her voice heavy with the weight of 1,000 silent worlds. The Stargazer's final transmission was a dual report, mission accomplished, and another voice in the universe has gone dark. Kalen Vor looked at the ambassador, at this small, fragile being from a chaotic, primitive species. He saw her and her people in a new light. They were not naive gardeners. They were archivists, desperately trying to save the very concept of life from an unseen, unknown predator. Their strange duality, their capacity for both creation and destruction, was the perfect evolutionary response to a universe that was both beautiful and terrifyingly hostile. They were not expanding to conquer. They were expanding to endure. They were running from a shadow that haunted the starways, a shadow the Glyptal, in all their ancient wisdom and power, had never even known was there. The treaty was no longer just about cultural exchange. The alliance was no longer just about scientific curiosity. It was about survival. Kalen Vor stood, his form casting a long shadow in the light of the star core. He looked past the ambassador, toward the stardusted void visible through the chamber's viewport. The universe had, in an instant, become infinitely larger and more terrifying. And the humans, the unpredictable, illogical, outdated humans, were not the threat he had feared. They were the ones who had been standing watch on the edge of the dark while the rest of the galaxy slept. Ambassador, Kalen Vor projected, his thought now resonating with a new and terrible purpose. Your work is no longer yours alone. Tell us what you know. Tell us everything. The great silence has found listeners.